you very much, Dr. Carney, for the kind introduction. I really appreciate that, and of course I want to welcome each and every one of you to our Educational Summit here today, so I appreciate all of you coming to hear some of the comments on California national landscape, especially on challenges and opportunities in special ed. And I want to thank, our moderator today, Pat Laura, too, as well. Thank you very much, and thank you for being a dedicated individual towards education, the quality of education, and to ensuring that more kids. But before I get on and make my remarks, I know that Dr. Carney got up here and he highlighted a lot, and it's important that you have a chancellor and a president of an institution that has the knowledge, and you can tell that when he got here and he spoke about special ed, he knew about it, had the knowledge, and had the numbers, and had the statistics, and knew how many kids are being affected. It's always positive when you have a leader that's in charge of an institution that gets involved. Dr. Carney, I know that you went on in terms of my own personal presentation, but we have had educational summits, and this is the first one we're having on special ed. I believe I've had over 20-some educational summits, and I think we've had quite a few of them, or the majority of them have been right here. But it took an individual that cared about education, and all we want to do is to expand and give knowledge to others about what's going on around the world around us, especially as it pertains to K through 12 and post-secondary, and that's all the way from preschool to our elementary, our junior highs, and then of course our high schools, and then going on into community colleges, and then our state colleges and our universities. We've had these kind of educational summits, but we've had them right here. And it's real easy for some of us to host them, and of course other legislators never even host anything, so I'm not going to say anything. But I believe that it's important that we try to obtain and give as much knowledge back to the community. Because the more knowledge that we can give back to the community, the better that we are in understanding how we can all work together and collaborate and make our institutions a lot better. And Dr. Carney, you have done that for us. And we have a special recognition that I'm going to go out of order right now that we'd like to present to Dr. Carney, because he is retiring and will not be coming back. And there's a new president, Tony Morales, I believe, that Tomas Morales will be here. But we have a special presentation because you have always been there to support our office. At the time that we said that we wanted to put together an educational summit, it's open to us. It's a campus that's been open to our community, but we've worked together in collaborating and bringing in not only the funds that he mentioned here, but this is a Hispanic Servant Institute, and since it has a population of 25% or more Hispanic, it also gets additional dollars and revenues that come in. And when we say Hispanic Servant Institute, that means every student benefits. It's not just because you have 25% Hispanic population that it's only that population that is going to benefit. It's the whole institution that really benefits. And a lot of people have a misnomer about it when they hear Hispanic Servant. Oh, well, you're only providing assistance to those kids. No, every kid who comes here, or every adult who comes here, is no longer a kid. They're adults. But on behalf of our office, we'd like to present you with this plaque, and it says, in appreciation and support of Congressman Joe Baca's annual educational summit, your commitment to academic excellence and your contributions make a difference in the educational community. We commend you on your dedication to the well-being of students and families in the 43rd Congressional District. We'd like to present you with this plaque, and it has a medallion of the seal of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. On here. There's a beautiful plaque with the seal on it. We'd like to present you this. Thank you, Al, for all that you've done. And again, I want to thank the panelists. As we all know, education is the sound in the future for our children, and it's essential to economic well-being of our nation. If we don't have an educated force, then they're not going to take care of our nation. So it's important that we continue to put emphasis in education, and I know that Patty Taylor is here from CTA and other members. They know the importance of education, and I want to continue to make sure that we invest as much as we can in education and put that as a high priority because they're our future. They're building our leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow. And whether it's in special ed or whether it's just in general education, we've got to make sure that we put as much emphasis to make sure that our well-being of our nation is there. And as President John Kennedy once said, our progress as a nation can be no swifter than our progress in education. The human mind is our fundamental resource. And this is what President John F. Kennedy once said. And students with special need face unique challenges, as was stated earlier. They deserve to receive equal access, and I state they deserve to receive equal access to a quality education like every other student. We should not discriminate against any of the students because of their special needs. And sometimes we stereotype, we have bullies that pick on them as well, and we have to deal with that aspect. Unfortunately, many families are upset with the educational services that the special needs children are receiving, and it's not only those that are there, but it also goes towards handicap. And there are individuals in assuring that we have access in our educational institutions and the financial assistance is there. We must work with school districts to improve training to work with special needs students. Ensure the teachers and support staff have the proper qualifications and experience, and that is important as we deal with a variety of different children with special needs. Ensure the school district have adequate number of trained special education professionals, and they can only do that if both at the state and the federal provides the funding as well. Because if we don't provide the funding, it makes it difficult for a superintendent such as Jerry Armendariz and others that are here to make those kind of decisions, because without the funding, this is what we'd love to, but where are we going to get the money? We can't do it like Congress, just print our money and then give it to you, I wish we could, but we can't, because we have the Tea Party and the other side saying we're going into further deficit, and so it presents a problem. So we need to make sure that no one is discriminated against because of special need. And think about some of the famous people who suffered from learning disability or with physical or mental handicaps. Think about this. And that's why it's important to think about why it's important to invest and to make sure that we take care of those individuals. Albert Einstein, Bill Gates, Thomas Edison, Stephen Hawking, Helen Keller. These are individuals that I mentioned that are nationally known. But I want to mention another one that is present right here, right now, that was put into a special ed class because he didn't speak a word of English and only spoke Spanish. And during that period of time, there was no ESL or bilingual education. What was identified as a special ed kid. And the parents did not get involved in the educational institution to put him into the mainstream, as we talked about trying to get some of the kids into the mainstream. Allowed that child to go through, especially elementary, and it wasn't until after junior high that the individual ended up getting into the mainstream and ended up being with other students as well. But during that period of time, had to go through every one of the special ed classes until they found out that he was normal, he was like anyone else, but he had to do it himself. I'd like to introduce you to him. That's Congressman Joe Baca. I don't like telling people a lot about that because, when it comes to political, they sort of like use, oh, well, you're one of those dummies, I mean, labels that they end up labeling us. And I was labeled during that period of time, and I was like anyone else that wanted to be part of the mainstream. But the way we were treated, during that time. And you face these kind of attitudes and behaviors in the classroom and with your peers. And a lot of people have talent and they're creative and they're successful. And look at me, I'm a United States Congressman. Look at the other individuals and what they're achieving and what they achieve. That's why we must have high expectation that our students can achieve their dreams. And It doesn't matter whether it's special ed or any other student. They have dreams like anyone else. We've got to help them find those dreams and help them find the kind of talent where they can actually become productive. And many of them are productive in different ways. And we just have to search for it and allow them to grow and to develop and bring it out. And if we do, they're going to contribute to our society like anyone else, but giving them those opportunities. And that's why I'm working in Congress to assure equal opportunity for all students, including those in special ed, including those that Dr. Carney talked about when we talked about the PROUD Act, or the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act here in California has allowed many of our students to go on to a college or university. I think that's great, but the PROUD Act really allows our students who will complete high school to go on and become citizens, but many of them maybe don't want to go on to a college or university, or maybe they're not ready to go on to a college or university, but would like to become productive citizens and work in our society, and through no fault of their own are here. We've got to give them that opportunity, and there are vocational skills, because we need a lot of mechanics, electricians, carpenters, other trades, you know, the hotels, the restaurant, landscapers. There's a variety of different areas that we've got to allow a student to choose whatever he or she would like to do, and this would allow these kids an opportunity. Can you imagine only taking the 3,000 to 4,000 kids that are part of the DREAM Act and saying, all right, we're only going to take care of you, but your brothers and sisters, or maybe aren't ready to go on to a college, you know what, we're going to have to send you back because you can't be here now that you've graduated from high school. I believe that's a problem, and I think that we've got to make sure that we create the opportunity. Remember that it was Ronald Reagan that gave amnesty to everyone here in 1985 and 86. And President Obama is not giving out amnesty to anyone. He is saying, if you've earned it, you've been here, no choice of your own, but you have an opportunity as well. And I'm hopefully that we'll be able to do that. We've incorporated into the DREAM Act, into comprehensive immigration legislation that we'll be doing this year, and hopefully we'll be able to get that through, and if not, hopefully at least get the DREAM Act and eventually tag the PROUD Act onto it at one time. But I've also introduced legislation that we need to look at, and part of it is the solution to revamp the failed No Child Left Behind Act, and how it even impacts on special ed too as well, and how it impacts on many of our teachers as we look at No Child Left Behind. And I believe that all of you teachers, administrators, and others, classified employees that work in our educational institution have a lot of talent and have a lot of ability, but you're not allowed to use that flexibility or that ability to help many other individuals that we need to make sure that they are able to grow and to develop. And so you're not allowed, so you have to use the measuring of a tool of a test to determine your success ratio. Are you being successful in the classroom? Is it just based on a test and the achievement of a child, or has it been on the ability to learn and to progress? And many of us learn at a different level. I learned at a different level, and many other students will learn at a different level. And then I was ready to go on to a community college, a state college, a university, and ultimately ended up graduating. But I wasn't one of the kids that was going through school and says, I know what I want right now. I didn't know what I wanted to be or where I was going to be. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. But finally made our decision. I've also introduced legislation that's called Save Our School Act, and that's to remove the testing provision of the No Child Left Behind. This bill will free school districts and teachers from teaching to the test culture, as I discussed earlier. And the other one is Safe Teachers Job Act. I've introduced that. This is a new bill, H.R. 5546, to give school districts flexibility to transfer funds in order to save our teachers. As we all know that many of the teachers right now are getting a lot of the pink slips and have gotten them. And there's numbers that go from 200 to 300 and some. And it's very difficult to live in that kind of a climate, and you want to be a good teacher, and you want to do as much as possible to help our kids. And a lot of times it's difficult. School districts receive a lot of federal funding, but because they receive funding in other areas, they're not able to use it to retain the teachers. What this would allow is to use that money, that there has to be accountability and flexibility that will be done, and oversight in that transparency, where they will be able to use that money to retain those teachers instead of laying them off. Because most of the school districts, and I remember when I was in Lau versus Nickel decision in developing the master plan for San Bernardino City Unified School District, is that a lot of the school districts ended up spending the money because they said, well, we don't want to give it back to the federal government, so we're going to buy computers, papers, desks, chairs, or whatever they went out and bought just to make sure that they spend the money. Well, now we're saying use that money effectively to retain teachers, so this way we'll be able to save their jobs, and then again, ensure that we have quality teachers that can meet the needs of a lot of our students in the classroom, because we are overcrowded as it is right now, and then we'll continue to make sure the students have the kind of attention that they need. So we can't afford to lose anymore. And educating our children with special needs is shared this responsibility that we need. We need to make sure that parents, teachers, administrators, and students must be willing to step up and be part of the solution. Again, we can't give up no matter how difficult the challenges are, and many individuals end up giving up. Again, as Helen Keller once said, optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope and confidence. Again, I want to thank all of the panelists for sharing their expertise and their ideas, and hopefully that we can hear from them and figure out how can we possibly work together jointly. I think we all need to collaborate, come together. Our communities, our businesses need to come together and say, how can we help and improve the quality of life for our educational institutions, for our students that are going to be part of our society. If we don't help them, then our society is not going to. We don't need to invest any more money in incarceration. We're spending too much money, I believe, in incarcerating individuals. And it's important that we invest in education. I'd rather spend the $42,000 that we spent on an inmate, spend it on education, versus having someone in the inmate get the benefits, medical, dental, TV, a roof, everything else over their head. But we have many other people that are losing their homes and kids that need to be educated. We need to reinvest that money. Again, I want to thank our Chancellor. Bruce is out here too as well in the back from San Bernardino Community College District. And I know that Silva Muraguin is here, one of the candidates that's running for the San Bernardino County Supervisor's 5th District is here, One of the other individuals that will be introduced, I know that my good friend Frank Reyes is just outside the door, walking in right now, late. Here. But I'd like to introduce Frank Reyes, who just walked in right now. Late, but he walked in. My good friend, I said. And of course, Dr. Manuela Sosa and Randy, who just had a very successful Inland Empire Scholarship fundraiser where they raised over $300,000 to get kids. Manuela and Randy. And then, of course, Joe Baca Jr. just had an event that gave out $44,000 in scholarships recently to kids. And this was on Friday a couple of weeks ago in the area as well. So we need to do as much as possible to raise money to make sure that kids have an opportunity to further their education. Again, I want to thank you. I want to thank the panelists. I look forward to hearing from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Baca, for your inspirational words and all you do for education. I'd like to read off some guests that we have here today. We have from the Mexican Consulate, Carolina Zaragoza Flores. From the National Education Association, the Senior Policy Advisor, John T. Riley. The San Bernardino Community College District, Bruce Barron, Chancellor. From the Rialto Unified School District Board of Education, Joseph Ayala. From the Inland Empire Job Corps Center, Linda Stull, the Center Director. And And I'd also like to thank our SELPA administrators. We have, and Anita, apologize on the last name, Anita Rusterholtz from the East Valley SELPA, Joanne Riley from West End SELPA, Ron Powell from the Desert Mountain SELPA, Pam Bender from Moreno Valley SELPA, Trina Spurlock from Pomona SELPA, Margie Jacobson from Riverside USD SELPA, and Sue Ball from the Riverside SELPA, County SELPA, I'm sorry. You don't look like Sue.
Yeah, but I have a prettier smile.
Okay. We'd also like to welcome Terry Williams, who's representing the San Bernardino County Schools. Thank you, Terry. And Bessie, the Riverside County Office of Education. And I'd like to also welcome Jerry Almendarez, my superintendent from the Colton Unified School District. Thank you all for being here today. Now, I would like to just tell you before we move on to our presentations that there are index cards at your table. Please, as the presenters are up here speaking, if you think of any questions you would like the presenters to be asked at the end of their presentations, you can write your questions down on those cards, and staff will be picking them up throughout the presentation. We will now begin our panel presentations, beginning with our national panel presentations. Our first presenter is John Riley, a senior policy analyst for the Education Policy and Practice Department of the National Education Association. John analyzes policies that support effective practices related to special education programs and services for students with disabilities. He has 25 years' experience teaching students of all levels, K through 12, with special needs. Child Find Coordinator, IEP Team Facilitator, and District Director of Instructional Consultation Teams. He served on the Professional Standards and Teacher Education Board of Maryland and holds a master's degree in learning disabilities. John's advocacy for students in the schoolhouse was culminated by working in the State House for Maryland Governor Paris N. Glennon as an education policy advisor. In addition to his special education program and policy work, Mr. Riley serves on the Universal Design for Learning, National Task Force, and the Advisory Board to the Response to Intervention Action Network. An advocate for human, civil, and economic rights, John believes policymakers should seek to maximize the achievement, skills, opportunities, and potential of all students by promoting their strengths and addressing their needs. Please help me welcome John Riley.
Good morning. Nice to see you. I empathize with Dr. Carney earlier saying I followed these beautiful children that were here, but I get to follow the children, Dr. Carney, and the Honorable Congressman Baca, so I feel the pressure and feel sorry for the last person on the agenda today. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to be here. As Pat was reading part of my rap sheet, I was reminded of the thing that I'm most proud of in my life and career is that I am a teacher. And I was reminded on the way over here this morning, I need to give a shout out to the Hilton in San Bernardino. They were wonderful when actually gave me a ride over here. First time in San Bernardino. However, they're wonderful people there. And the young man that was driving told me that his mom was a special education teacher and she's retiring next Friday locally. So I'm always happy to get outside the Beltway and get in the impact zone where local districts deal with the reality of dealing with the constraints and challenges before them. But it just got me reflecting so much on my years in the schoolhouse as a teacher. And I'm reminded of the novel and the movie The Prince of Tides, you might recall when the main character, Tom, is in this heated argument with his sister, and she said, "You could have been so much more than a teacher." To which he retorts, "There's no word in the English language that I revere more than the word teacher. I've honored myself and indeed the entire family of man by becoming a teacher." And those words always resonate with me, and I just wanted to share that this morning because that's what we're all about. And for the Congressman to host this education summit and to specifically focus on our special needs students makes my heart sing. And I'm so proud to be here and again, to get outside of the Beltway in Washington. And, I am a policy person, but I'm not a policy monk. I have taught for many years. I've worked with child find clinics, which some of you in the room may know serves when students become the responsibility of the school system on or before their 3rd birthday, which is kind of Part C, and we'll talk a little bit more about federal legislation here in a minute. But I have done that and worked in elementary schools, secondary schools, facilitated IEP teams as the superintendent's designee, and also worked with transition programs with adults because, as you know, the federal law says these young people are our responsibility until age 21, 22. And so I bring that lens to the policy world. And when I first came to NEA's policy department, I was concerned because I'm not a wonk, and I said to them, I may not be your guy, but they said, no, that's exactly what we're looking for. And I quickly found out in working with coalition groups within Washington that often that lens is not in the room. So again, I want to applaud the Congressman for bringing this together with stakeholders like yourselves. So as soon as I figure out how this slide thing moves on, I'll move it. Is there a, do I hit the mouse? Oh, some clown. It's like the powerful wizard of our house. Thank you, mystery person. I wasn't sure who would be in the room, but in talking to people this morning, I think there's mostly educators, but there are some folks that deeply care, and they're stakeholders in the communities. And this was in the paper Sunday, and 2 of the people said, I saw in the paper and wanted to be here this morning. So very quickly, just so we all have this operating base, my focus, and I think the focus of most people on the panel, is going to be the responsibility of the public school in serving our students with disabilities. And that all was driven by a piece of legislation known as the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. We use a lot of acronyms in special education. We can refer to it as IDEA. The legislation that works with school-age children is listed here. I already touched upon ages birth to age 2. We call that Part C. The funding is derived from Part C of the IDEA. The rest of it is Part B, which deals with 3 to 5-year-olds, as well as students age 6 on up to and through age 21. So for the most part, I think that's what we'll be focusing on today. This is a piece of legislation that actually was extended, passed by Congress back in 1975, actually, is when this first came to light. The next slide shows the really kind of the intent and the promise of what's in this legislation. And it's there in big print, but I want to say it out loud because it is to provide access to a free, quality education that is key and uniquely American promise of equal opportunity to all. This really was driven almost through civil rights, and it came out of a lawsuit in Pennsylvania Park. Back at that time, it was the Parent Association for Retarded Citizens, a word that we no longer use, but you can get the idea that lots of litigation was going on at the time, mainly driven by parents, rightfully so, that their children deserved a free and appropriate public education. We call that FAPE. And it needed to happen in the schoolhouse closest to where they lived, to the greatest extent possible. We know that's not always possible in some areas. However, it needs to be in what we call the least restrictive environment for most kids. That is and should be their neighborhood school. So that's the promise of IDEA. Unfortunately, present company excluded with Congressman Baca, Congress has not lived up to the responsibility of fully funding IDEA. The intent has always been that they would pay 40% of the pupil's cost to educate that child. They've never come anywhere near living up to it. It's fluctuated between 15 to 19%, the highest being year before last when the present administration, through the Recovery Act, it was up around 19% at that time. So it has never come close to being fully funded. That is a real issue for administrators in this room because educating students with special needs is often more expensive than educating a child in general education. As you can guess, special transportation has cost. If they need support services, a speech-language therapist, occupational therapist, counselors, whatever, those things come at an additional cost. So we realize that it is expensive, but it is the right thing to do because they are indeed all our children. And that's the point I want to make today is I think we need to get away from this idea of us and them and regular ed and special ed. They are our children and they belong in that schoolhouse. They need to be educated with their peers. And just as I think Dr. Carnig had, or Congressman Baca referenced earlier, the Hispanic services for students on this campus, we need to get away from the idea that it's just for them. Everyone benefits from that. The same analogy is true with our students with special needs. All students benefit by being in that classroom and learning from them as well. I am a huge proponent of inclusion, but don't get me wrong, that is a continuum on a service level. They should be included, but it's not right for every child. But I fear in these tough economic times that school districts are doing more inclusion because it's more cost effective and it may save them some money in the long run. So we need to be cautious when we say we fully support inclusion of all students. So there's always a caveat, and that's something I've learned bringing that lens to the national level. What works in your district may not be true the next state over, or on the other coast. So I think in policy, the other thing I've learned is we need to almost be like physicians and that first do no harm. We should not be putting regs and guidelines out there that hurt a school district that's probably going far and above another school district, that we don't restrain them in any way, which is another issue we'll get to, seclusion and restraint. If we could have the next slide, please. This is the big issue, and I feel redundant because the Congressman and Dr. Carnig hit on this already. It's the resources. The bottom line is money. We need to fully fund the federal legislation of IDEA. Congress needs to come up with that money, and there are ways. I take exception with folks that, we have this group out there now yelling, cut, cut, cut. Well, we saw the young people that led us in the Pledge of Allegiance today. And guess what? They don't get a second shot at kindergarten. They don't get a second shot at 3rd grade, 12th grade. We need to keep the resources funneled to public education at this time. And I would contend, quite frankly, now more than ever, we can't go through this economic mess again. Lessons learned. And the way we can do that is a strong public school system, educating every child. And that means every child. I know there are folks that believe, special needs, they aren't going to be able to do this or that. Wrong. They can do this. And they can become citizens who hold jobs, are reliable, good citizens, tax-paying, voting, and members of our community. So I push back, and I encourage you to push back and shout out every time someone says, we can't afford to do this. We can do it. Our priorities need to be straight on how to do it. And, I don't want to get off soapbox here, but, there's a lot of wealthy Americans and there's lots of corporations that don't pay the same share of taxes you and I do. So there's an avenue, and we can talk about international matters too, but there are avenues to get to the funding that's needed for these folks. As I referenced, this promise was made back in '75. We're still not even halfway to the 40% that should be coming back to local school districts. Okay, I think we've hit on most of that. Yeah, and that bottom bullet I think is huge, and I'm anxious to hear from the local folks because even when I left the classroom several years ago, there was already this feeling kind of coming from my colleagues on the general ed side that, those kids cost so much more, and, we should be pushing, gifted and talented, and I just think that, this shortfall in the economy, my greatest fear is that special education issues aren't going to be in the room or at the table. And while we have our issues with the Department of Ed, I got to tell you, there's an open line of communication. With this administration, I can say we are in the room, we are at the table, and voices are being heard. We don't agree on everything, but I can tell you from working in Washington, there's a much better give and take at this point. Voices are being heard, and that's crucial because it's really in the impact zone that the local schoolhouse and local boards of education where they have to come up with these issues of, when an item is placed on an IEP, that's an individualized education plan, the school district is obligated to fulfill those services. And we can talk all we want about federal government's responsibility, but they're dealing with, this day and this month and this year for this student, so they have to come up with it, and it's very, very challenging, and I would say, it's going to be the greatest challenge that we talk about here today. If we could move to the next, please, the great and powerful wizard. Okay, well, as we're saying again, it's the financial resources that really are the greatest challenge. The other thing, Congressman Baca touched on what was known as No Child Left Behind. That has driven a lot of issues around assessment. We have schools being ranked and published, and it all comes down to this single snapshot on a given day of how a student performs. And I can tell you from being a teacher, some of the most talented kids that we would think would do great on a test, on that given day, if they see their dog get hit while they're sitting on the school bus and come in that day, they are not totally focused. So a single snapshot on a given day is really not a true measure of what our students can or cannot do. I would suggest, we need to move away from this. I urge elected leaders to knock it off about this, and Congressman Baca touched on it. It shouldn't just be about the single assessment. We need to get away from that thought and really do what public education is designed to do, and that is enlighten and make the most productive students and young people that we can. There's some ways to get to this. Universal design for learning is a set of principles. It kind of came out of the architectural world, quite frankly. The cuts and the curves for wheelchairs, putting up closed captioned on screens. Those are all some examples of what universal design for learning. Amplifying a room for those who have hearing difficulties. These are things that should be in place and should be part of our assessments too. Those principles should be built in to any type of assessment that we're doing. So again, this benefits all kids, not just students with IEPs or someone with a hearing loss. For me, I benefit with closed captioning because I'm the type of learner that I not only need to see it, but I need to hear it. So again, it's good for all kids. And I look forward to the day that, we kind of did this for folks. When we trained special ed teachers years ago, we used to send them down the hall to their resource room, and you go to the special ed teacher for your reading and your math. And now they're sitting in inclusion classrooms, and we still have a lot of folks that came out of that training that only the special ed teacher could deal with that student that has autism. Not true. And as you know, there are alarming rates of increasing rates of autism, and they're sitting in our general education classrooms. And I think the challenge is really for higher ed and teacher prep programs at this point. It's not enough to just give a foundations course on one class on special education. All of our educators need to be trained in meeting the needs of students, including differentiated instruction for all, the principles of universal design for learning. Also with assessment, I would contend that it needs to be about multiple measures. We need to be looking at not only attendance rates and graduation rates, but end of unit studies. When teachers are implementing a curriculum and providing those tests, those assessments should be measured. We need to measure student growth annually, not just on a standardized test and putting everyone in a clump of, well, you either read or above or below 4th grade. And by the way, many of those assessments aren't really calculated for that age or that grade level that they pontificate to be all about. We just need to be careful, and I urge you to question every time you say, oh, well, the United States is 25th and this and that internationally. You need to look at that nation. You know, most of them, unlike us, we educate whoever showed up on that doorstep this morning at 8:15. They are our children. A lot of countries aren't doing that. You know, they track children, and they'll say, you know, this is a track that's going to just go to a career or, you know, vocation, what we used to call vocational or technical education. We need to be proud of the fact that we educate every child and we give them a shot. It comes back to that free and appropriate public education. Some other challenges that have grown out of the ITEA legislation, and again, I'm anxious to hear from local school districts, are challenges around discipline. The last reauthorization dealt with alternative interim placements for students who have behaviors of lashing out, either being a threat to themselves or a threat to other students and staff. It talked about interim placements of 45 days and what is, you know, in this hierarchy of offenses, you know, can you suspend in school, out of school? Do you still provide the education services when they're suspended out of school? These are huge issues for local school districts. One thing that's bubbled up recently in Washington is legislation that was introduced by Senator Harkin, a wonderful senator, a good friend of public education. But he's introduced this legislation. It's like safe schools kind of legislation, and everyone wants a safe and orderly environment. But we need to be very careful, again, that we think about, first of all, our parents need to be involved in these decisions. They are part of an IEP team. And if a student we know has ongoing or escalating behaviors, and a functional behavioral assessment has been done, and a behavior intervention plan is in place, and that plan is on an IEP, if the staff, along with the school nurse and school psychologist, if they have been trained in, for example, crisis prevention intervention, sometimes those kind of things need to be on the IEP and need to be in place for the safety of that student, for the safety of all students, and for the safety of staff. This is where we kind of part ways with the senator's legislation. We contend that if it is on the IEP, and it's a multidisciplinary team that's developed that behavior intervention plan, and the parent is part of that team and has agreed, they should be allowed to carry that out. So the intentions of the legislation are excellent. If for nothing else, it's driving a conversation around behavior and what's good for students. I think I'll touch on that a little later, but there's a wonderful program that is addressed in ITEA, and it's Positive Behavior Intervention Supports. We call it PBIS. I think most states refer to it as PBIS, but some call it PBS. I'm not sure here in California. You refer to it as PBIS here. I'm looking at thank you. This is a wonderful program, and again, it's good for all kids. I mean, this is stuff that can work. You can have it leveled out in your school where there are consistent rules, consistent rewards, consistent consequences, and it's tiered. And then as there are more severe behaviors, that you have a plan in place to deal with that. But most schools are starting this type of thing, but some have a long way to go because it's not happening everywhere. So those are challenges that are coming out of the legislation. And we look for ITEA to be reauthorized. It's due to be reauthorized. But as you can imagine, with the economic issues and things going on in Washington, it's not on the front burner right now. And again, I applaud the Congressman for you and your community for putting this on the front burner. But right now, we're awaiting the reauthorization of ESEA, the Elementary Education, Secondary Education Act, which got described earlier as No Child Left Behind. I refer to it as ESEA because the intention in 1964 and President Johnson was, again, that we give every kid a shot and have this legislation in place. So there's talk of that moving, quite honestly. Now being in Washington several years, nothing's going to happen with it. Everything now is frozen. The gridlock is around presidential election. There's a wait and see, like, oh, let's see who's going to be in charge. Unfortunately, that's reality. I don't see ESEA moving until after November. But when that moves, then IDEA's reauthorization should move as well. So I'm excited about that. I hope it happens before I retire, but you never know in DC and what will be on the front burner. Look at the next one, please. And then speaking of the opportunities with ESEA getting reauthorized, followed by IDEA, there are some great opportunities for everyone, and I have some listed here. There are these multi-tiered systems of supports that are out there already. I touched on PBIS, where it deals with behaviors. Response to intervention is a program that, when operated and implemented with fidelity and with rigor, it's very effective. It should be happening in all schools. It can help not only students with disabilities, it can help all kids. It's important for the educator to know where they are, what they know, what they can do right now, and provide them with strategies that can help move them forward. It involves progress monitoring, but it's a wonderful program. Again, it works for all kids. We're working very hard in the policy world, at least at NEA, to get this incorporated into ESEA. Again, I contend what's in IDEA really should be in the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. Response to intervention should be in there. There are some draft amendments right now that include it. Universal design, it's in a draft amendment right now with reauthorization of ESEA, that be included. So I think those are some great opportunities, getting RTI, PBIS, and UDL incorporated, focused upon focusing on instruction, because that's the vision that I see most elected officials are missing right now. You know, they want to measure schools and you know, make the headline of this school made adequate yearly progress and this school didn't, and the bar is unrealistic. Let's get away from the focus on the assessment and focus on what's good for kids, because I contend what's good for kids is good for teachers, and that involves adequate class size, having professional development where they're learning about the needs of students with autism, how to differentiate their instruction. We're not asking them to do more, we were asking them to think about how they do it and do it differently. So to me, that's what the whole child approach is, and I think that should be our focus. We need to care about not only their academic needs, but the social and emotional needs that make productive, happy, healthy people that we all want to be. Speaking of which, I want to acknowledge that adult learners, like students, have needs, and it's hard to sit this long. So feel free to stay up, stretch, move about as you need to. We're not offended. We've been in the classroom. I think the other opportunity is for these transitions as these young folks move from the schoolhouse to, it might be an employment opportunity, some type of internship. We need to be able to focus and get them into places and businesses that are friendly towards having this type of a young person in there, because again, everyone benefits from it. But we need to get away from the idea that these students can never attend college, because quite frankly they can, and we know students are often misidentified, as Congressman Baca gave a beautiful example of himself. We need to look at those issues of disproportionality. We know that too many students of color are placed in special needs programs when that's not the case at all. There's just lots of issues and opportunities out there. If I could have the last one, I want to just leave you with some thoughts. There are lots of resources out there. I urge you to focus on these sites. These are some that we deal with. I tried to prop up some things, you know, as a teacher, I always like to have visual things, but we developed policy briefs on all these issues that I've touched on: positive behavior supports, universal design for learning, response to intervention. We have those. My email was up there, but it's very simple. It's just jriley, R-I-L-Y, @NEA.org. Feel free to contact me if I can help. The other thing I want to mention is we have this IDEA cadre through the National Education Association. We have a teacher here in California that's on it. So when regions and school districts ask for perhaps professional development on response to intervention, we have resources that are available for free. These are folks, many of them hold national board certification. They do this because they love it. They want to train other trainers. But I want you to get away from this idea, we're not your mother's union anymore. We really do care about professional development issues because, again, what's good for kids is what's good for folks that work in the schoolhouse. So we are a resource available to everyone here, parents, educators, administrators. We have great coalition partners with the ITA Partnership and also with the Council of Exceptional Children, CEC. Also, as an NEA policymaker, I work with the Response to Intervention Action Network. Again, they have great resources available to parents and school districts, as does UDL, Universal Design for Learning. You can Google them, you can contact me, but they have an organization called CAST, C-A-S-T. I forget what it stands for, but they do everything on Universal Design for Learning, and again, have resources available to schoolhouse workers as well as parents and administrators. So that's a little bit about what I know and do. I hope I didn't ramble too much. When I woke up this morning, my BlackBerry said it was 9 o'clock, and I panicked, like, oh my gosh, I missed it. You know, my timing's all off, got in late. So I went rushing out of the room, and I feel like I haven't quite rebounded. So I hope I at least spoke in some sentences and made some sense. But I'm happy to be here all morning, and I really am anxious to hear about those of you in the zone and the impact zone. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Our next national panel presenter is Michael Gerber, PhD, Professor of Education, UC Center for Research on Special Education, Disabilities and Developmental Risk, University of California, Santa Barbara. Dr. Michael Gerber is currently a Professor of Education and contributes to special education disabilities and risk emphasis, as well as to the educational leadership and organizations emphasis both in the Education Department of the Gervitz Graduate School of Education. Since 1994, Dr. Gerber has been the director of the Center for Advanced Studies of Individual Differences in the Institute for Social Behavior and Economic Research. Dr. Gerber is also a founding member of UCSB's interdisciplinary graduate emphasis in cognitive science. In 2009, Dr. Gerber became the president-elect for the Division for Learning Disabilities in the Council for Exceptional Children. Before his PhD, he was an elementary school teacher in Oakland, California, where he taught 6th grade, coordinated a compensatory education program, and eventually taught students with learning and behavior problems. Dr. Gerber received his PhD in special education from the University of Virginia in 1981. In June 2005, faculty from a steering committee to plan for a new UC-wide Center for Research on Special Education, Disabilities, and Developmental Risk. The center stimulates and conducts research of state, national, and international significance and supports doctoral research training across the 10 campus systems. Please join me in welcoming Michael L. Gerber.
Thank you all. I want to thank Representative Baca for holding this summit, and I applaud him for calling attention to special education. Those of you who are involved in special education realize that the people who work in the area are often as marginalized as the children are, so it's very nice to have a whole session of the summit devoted to this. I also was a school teacher, as you just heard. I have been involved in education professionally for 41 years. Yesterday was my 41st anniversary. So the coincidence is not so much a coincidence. My wife decided that she wanted to be a school teacher when she was in 4th grade and never changed her mind. And after we dated in college, she said, well, it's been very nice dating you, but I'm going to go become a teacher. And I thought to myself, teacher, that sounds like a good idea. So I thought I'd surprise her, and I would get into the same teacher training program that was then Cal State University in Hayward, Cal State University East Bay. And I appeared on the first day of the classes, and she was livid. We didn't have stalking laws in those days. And she said, "No, you have no interest in education. You just came here because you're following me." And I said, "No, I'm legitimately interested in education." And as a master of bad timing, about a week later, I asked her to marry me, and she said no. So I waited before Christmas break, and I asked her to marry me again. She said no. And she must have had a good Christmas break, because after Christmas break, I asked her a third time, and she said yes. And so yesterday was our anniversary, and so my professional life and my marital life coincided. I'm very pleased to be here today to represent 26 outstanding researchers in the University of California's 10-campus system. I've distributed a handout because you really should be hearing from all of them. In one of their few acts of unwisdom, they consented to let me come and talk for them. But if you really heard all of them, they're an amazing treasure for the state of California, and work actively on behalf of children with disabilities and their families, and the schools that educate them. So I'm going to, in a short time I have, I'm going to try to touch on three things. First of all, I'm going to say a few things about the university's center, so that with your handouts, so you'll know that you have a resource available to you. These are fine scholars whose work it's not ivory tower research. It's research that has practical importance for the lives of the children of the schools and their families. And I urge you to feel free to contact any of us. The emails are both in the handout and will be on the screen. So I want to talk about that very briefly. I'm going to highlight a little bit of some current research findings that I think are interesting and relevant to the discussion. And then, since I have a real live congressman in the room, I think I should talk about policy things. So I'm going to try to challenge you to think about some problems with special education. I don't view the future as gloomy, but I don't see it as being unchallenged. And I think that everybody in this room who cares about children with disabilities and the education of those children, including Congressman Baca, of course, ought to be paying attention to these problems. So let me jump right in and say this is a university-wide center. We created the center in 2005 to pool the resources of all the campuses and to facilitate our ability to do research together. So everybody involved is a successful and active researcher, but we constitute an impressive group. That was all 26 of us, and several collaborations have grown organically out of this center and continue to grow. Each year we're now doing, just now doing over $10 million worth of extramurally funded research across all of these 26 researchers. And that's only for the current projects that we're involved in. We also have among us about 50 eager doctoral students. These are bright young people who we try to help educate collectively. We try to give the students the benefit of all of the researchers in the UC system, not just the ones who are on their particular campus. And the students have taken hold of this idea, and they form their own kind of advisory council for the center, and they hold their own research conference every year, usually in the winter in February. And they're just about to go public with this conference. They have been holding for each other for the past several years, but they now have achieved a kind of critical mass, and I think they want to now invite the public to come see the really excellent work that they do. I would be really remiss if I didn't mention at this moment in time the jeopardy that California's state universities and University of California systems and community colleges